Welcome to EIPIP Meeting 83. I have shared agenda in chat. This is issue number 241 at EIPIP GitHub repository. We have a bunch of pull requests and issues added from the EIPS repository to be discussed today and probably to make some decisions towards the merging. The first set of pull requests are the list of PRs proposed by Sam Wilson to update EIP 1. Anyone having strong feeling to merge these and not, probably we can discuss one by one. So the first PR here is 6907. It is to update EIP 1 to allow link to BIPS. Any thought, objection, support?
So I think the only person with an objection was Gavin, and I don't think they're here. Yeah.
All right. We still have, I think, 3-4 more EIP editors. So anyone from the editors community, other than Gavin, having strong opposition to that?
All right, so I think we can probably go ahead with this, and then we can resolve Gavin's.
Concern on the pull request.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we can resolve it after, as long as everybody else is on board with this.
Sounds good. So we can move on to the next number, and that is 7111. It's add W3C as permissible origin. All of them are proposed by Sam, so I'd be curious to hear thoughts from other editors. Yeah, if you have any objection or anything you would like to add or in support or not in support.
I think it should be just
favor.
I can see no reason at all not to allow it.
Perfect. And we're okay with the wording as written, or?
Any changes we would like to see in the PR in wordings, or we are good? Probably we can start with the same wordings if we do not have anyone opposing to that. Very well, we are just joined by live client. Matt, we were discussing issue number, the pull request number 7111. So it is about to add W3C as a permissible origin. Seems like most of the editors are on board. Just checking in case you have any thoughts, concern with this one, especially with respect to the wordings as is.
There's actually still some discussion on the W3C one. So we'll have to. I'll go over it again to make sure everything's good. But as long as nobody objects, I can merge it.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it closely, but it seems fine.
Yeah, we could probably just deal with these all as one big group. So like, BIPs. Anybody object to linking to Bitcoin improvement proposals? Speak now or hold your silence. All right, W3C. All right, IETF, RFCs. Are we allowed to link to those? Anybody object? Cool. And then the what working group? Any objections? Cool. The yellow paper, I know you object, Matt, so I will let you make your case again.
the yellow paper is not up to date and it's deprecated in terms of using the execution spec. So I don't think we should allow authors to continue linking to it.
Would it make sense to link to, I don't know, like the execution API's repo instead or something? Like what's the equivalently authoritative stable link that replaces the yellow paper?
Execution specs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we'll just leave the yellow paper off as that's contentious, but yeah, all the other ones I didn't hear any objections, so I will merge all of those.
The execution specs are not useful for that purpose. They're code. You can't. They're not useful for the purpose that the yellow paper is. You can't express concepts. You can't say this is a concept that I'm using. That you can't just include blocks of Python code to explain. I'm sorry, we've been here before.
So we can probably go ahead and merge the first four, and we'll leave that open for
No,
any
no,
further discussion.
I greatly object to disallowing the yellow paper. It has limitations, but it's the original fundamental specification of the protocol. If you're
I agree with Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind linking to the yellow paper, like to a specific commit of the yellow paper, because even though it's not up to date, like if you're linking to it at a specific commit, it should be fine.
In the last meeting, we discussed about giving permission to a specific commit. So I'm assuming that it is being proposed with the allowing link to yellow paper with respect to having specific commit. And it seems like we just need to get Matt on board, and everybody else seems to be on board. Matt, would you be fine with commits?
I mean, we had to do it by commit already, so it's not any different. And I still don't think we should be linking to the yellow paper.
Okay.
So if you want in a proposal to state the exceptional halting conditions on the execution, how do you state them?
Like you're asking for how you would state them with the execution spec, you would say any location where a subclass of exceptional halt is thrown.
And how would you make a reference to that?
Like a link to a list of them, or like, is that what you're asking? You're asking how you would link to a list of the exceptional halting conditions?
Yeah, I'm thinking of proposals I've written, and how the hell would I write them? By referring to, I guess I would have to understand that piece of code, and the reader would have to understand the piece of code well enough to even understand what you just said.
I mean, the same is true for the yellow paper, but I think this is why we shouldn't allow it. Like, we don't want to have new specs coming through trying to describe things the way the yellow paper described it, because it's not maintained.
Okay, that's a different fight I'm trying to make. But if the community decides that they do not want to have a specification, then I can't stop that.
I think if someone is maintaining it and it's like staying up to date, I don't really have that much of an objection to including it. I still
Well,
like
I think
generally
that's
prefer.
I think that's the problem though, right? Like we aren't linking to the live version of the yellow paper, so I don't see a harm in linking to an old version of it.
You link to it for concepts. It lays out the concepts. An execution spec is not conceptual. And many,
The execution spec does lay the concepts out. It implements the whole protocol.
yeah, but it's code.
It's the same way that we do the consensus layer. It works fine for them. I think that it's better to try and unify the approach that we take to specifying the consensus protocol, both consensus and execution. And because the yellow paper isn't maintained, I don't think that we should be making room for it. We should focus on unification of all of these things.
Okay. There are thousands of references to the yellow paper just go to Google Scholar and search for it. Thousands of references. And the execution spec, it is great to have it, but it doesn't serve the purpose. Programmers can read it. Mathematicians can't necessarily read it. Logicians can't necessarily read it.
We don't have a lot of mathematicians writing EIPs.
But a lot of people read EIPs. So even though they might not join to write it, they might read it and then they use it in the work. And the fact that one question I have is that one reason we put so much restriction, which I object on linking, is because some link can change. I'm a little bit curious why at this moment we are rejecting linking to yellow paper because it didn't change and get updated. This seems like conflicting with the principle why we restrict linking to it in the first place. And can expect execution spec can in the future stop working as well. Can be like if it happens to yellow paper that it stops being maintained.
Yeah, but we have 3 or 4
are
full-time people working on the execution specs, and it's being funded by the foundation. So I have like high confidence that it's going to continue to be maintained. Of course, that can change, but that's just what we are today.
Yeah, I believe that you can have high confidence in it, so it can change, just like yellow paper can stop being maintained. And I don't see the reason why that's a paper of yellow paper cannot be made. Yellow papers still have a lot of concepts that's still valid in the EVM instructions and the costs, etc., and how it works, the transition of states. That has not changed. It does need to be updated, and I feel that we should put resources to updating it, but it doesn't reject us from seeing yellow paper, and it's got and academia and many other group of people think it's super helpful in their view. And the fact that we stop linking to it actually reduces the chance that it gets noticed and support. And we just excluding mathematicians and other people from even joining this conversation.
Anyway, there's just a long history of computer languages, other systems that started out with reference implementations and then wrote actual specifications. WASM went from a reference implementation to a real specification. Somebody found the money and paid some experts to do that, and they did it. And reference implementations are not specifications. They're not readable by anybody but programmers in the language in which they're written. And to ask people to learn Python simply in order to to participate in understanding and working with Ethereum is a big mistake. And I don't think we should contribute to it. And I just don't see the problem. Of course, in the link, as part of the editing, it is a question of, does this link to the yellow paper, is it something that's likely to change, to be a big problem?
Maybe we allow references to yellow paper in some particular section when where a person is giving some background or rationale.
I don't know why we talk about this every call. Like, we need to bring the yellow paper up to spec and then to discuss it. Like, we just talk about the same things we talked about last call every single time. Nothing's changed in the last 2 weeks.
Well, sorry, I just added it to this agenda because I added all the other ones that wanted to add permissible sources. I kind of figured we'd just be like, we're at a stalemate. We can't decide. We'll just move on to something else. And I'm sorry for putting it on the agenda
It's okay.
again.
It's okay. I'm just saying, we do this a lot.
I just, okay. Maybe we
I
table
love
this
talking
and
to you
come
guys.
back to it at the end of the meeting so we can get through the other stuff. Is that all right with everybody? Just because I think this is going to be the longest discussion and we can get through the other stuff quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. So just for note takers, so far we have reached consensus for the first 4 pull requests that could be merged. And for the 5th one, if we get the time today, we will come back to the discussion. And I'm sorry, Matt, if we do not get time, we probably would like to discuss it further, or whatever is decided, depending upon if there is any request to get it discussed in the future meetings, we may be adding. All right, moving on to the next one. The next one is not for any proposal, but it's for about CI bump. Seems like it has received a thumbs up from Victor and waiting for review by Sam and Matt. Anyone has thoughts or would like to maybe take a look at PR number 6813, CI bump?
Yeah, I'll take a look through it. It's if it's just dependencies, it'll be fine to do offline.
Sounds good. The next one is here about an EIP draft, which is now closed, and it is requested by author in the comment to the agenda that he thinks that this proposal could be reconsidered and this PR can be allowed to merge. I wonder what editors think about it.
If anybody merges a PR to set a definition for EVM equivalence, I will submit a different definition of EVM equivalence, just to make that clear.
So I think I'm on that one. Originally, I think it was trivial that it doesn't seem like a EIP worthy of EIPs. It seems like I'm slightly convinced and neutral now with the author proposing the context where some of the ZK EVM solutions trying to market them as EVM compatible, but in some of the behaviors they actually did not. And so that's the background of the EIP. And with that, I'm leaning towards neutral because it seems to be to me some value to clarify that if you really are EVM compatible, there is certain rule that you can't market anything that is not fully compatible with EVM, with using EVM compatible. I see value in that, and I just want to hear other EIP editors about.
There is absolutely value in doing it. It's just we are not an authority, right? Like no one here has the power to stop the Ethereum community from advertising full EVM compatibility or compliance. Like adding this EIP will change nothing in the marketing world.
It is also okay, it's also okay that people will argue that they are not EVM compatible. And here is one of the ways that they make this argument. I don't see the reason if there's value there, I don't see a strong reason not to include it, or at least as an informational to show some opinion. But I'm open to be to hear other things as well.
So, like I said, when we first brought this topic up, if anybody merges an EIP defining EVM compliance, I will make a different EIP with different EVM compliance, and there will be no clarity. So there, like as a thought experiment, that shows that there's no reason to merge this EIP because it doesn't change anything.
What's the category here? Is it informational or any other? Because if it's informational, probably it would not make much of a difference if someone wants to go ahead with this, because it's not changing the protocol or it's not even suggesting to follow it.
Yeah, I think it's a suggestion. It's more or less than a suggestion, and then I don't know if there's a reason in our playbook to officially reject this as a EIP, informational EIP. So I would love to hear like what's our official reason to put down there. So hey, just because we don't think it matches this criteria, we're rejecting it. And then in the future, if this criteria is not met, we'll go by that as well. Yeah. But I also don't want to I will spend too much time on this. So that's other topics that we can discuss. Yeah.
Maybe anyone would like to comment to or maybe respond to this proposal in the agenda itself. That would be great to have. So at least Arthur, who cannot join this meeting, may get a clear response. Or if we are open to have it discussed some other time, we can do that either.
I just had a question. If it isn't, I can see the argument that the EIP group or the EIP corpus isn't where this gets decided. I feel like it's kind of a meta question. Is that an execution APIs question or a future iteration of the yellow paper question? Like, is there some authority, some community that would be qualified to say, you know, for interop purposes, this is the, you know, like for the sake of bridge safety and bridge interoperability, this is what we're defining EVM as complete, I don't know, RPC equivalence or something. Like, who is there another group that would be in a position to define that?
I don't think there's really a group right now, but I think there probably should be some sort of coordination amongst L2s to describe what their standards are and the interoperability amongst them. Like, we have defined the Ethereum protocol, and the word equivalent has a definition, and people are free to call things equivalent if they want to, but if it doesn't follow the execution specs, it's not Ethereum, and that's fine. But once you start opening the door for having some flexibility on that definition, I think it's like really difficult to actually describe like what are they implementing, what are the deviations they're making. So I think that the layer 2 should be doing this.
I think the only way to enforce this is with a trademark. You could have a seal of approval from someone who owns a trademark and then sue people who market it incorrectly. And that is the only thing that would actually make a difference in this.
Or maybe a test suite, if that's imaginable. It's a huge pain in the ass to write, but would it be, I mean, the trademark
we have a test suite for Ethereum, and they can run it, and if they pass all the tests, they can say that they're Ethereum equivalent.
Right. So maybe that test suite just needs to be have harder tests or something, right? Like, if
they're pretty hard, there's a lot of tests in there. I promise you, no rollup passes them.
Ah, okay. So then, if there's already a test suite they're failing, at the very least, until there's someone who feels litigious, an informational EIP could explain that. I don't know. I'm just advocating for the
I
devil.
mean, they know they're
sorry.
not EVM equivalent. They're trying to add flexibility to the word of like being equal to Ethereum. There is
Yeah.
flexibility on this, and that's fine. Like I get it. They can do what they want to do. I don't think that we should be, you know, trying to approve of any specific definition because there are several different definitions about what it means to be equivalent.
One thing I'll add as well for rollups is they're not all EVM based rollups. So it'd be kind of weird to have like EVM equivalents be like enshrined in a way as something better. Like it feels like that's not quite the right level of abstraction where if L1 wants to like make a claim about what is or isn't the rollup, it should be something that like also includes ZK rollup. It might be something more of like a bridge standard to some amount of like, I don't know, like, and effectively like L2 beats is probably the best we have for doing this, but yeah, there's a risk of like, if you focus on EVM equivalence too much, then it's like subtly like worse for ZK rollups. Yeah.
Right. Like they're trying to come up with 4337 that's equivalent across both optimistic rollups and ZK rollups, and it's a pretty hard problem. So I think trying to expand that across all of the EVM is even harder, and they just need to figure it out themselves. I don't think that we can like enforce anything upon them. There's challenges that they're going to uncover as they implement the stuff, and they're going to need to make their own decisions. I just don't think that the market right now values the interoperability that people are requesting with this like EVM equivalence standard yet. Otherwise, they would be working together.
Well, it seems it's clear enough that most of the EIP editors are not in favor of having it reopen or maybe even considered for being a standard at Ethereum repository. So maybe we can give it a rest. I assume from Victor's earlier conversation that he is like from favor is moving towards neutral. So unless we get a strong support of editors, we probably will not be able to reopen this proposal and move it forward. Any final comment on this topic before we move on to the next one? All right, so moving on to the next item, which is a discussion continued or updates from the past meeting. The first one here listed is new contract interface, and EIPs should be required to include a privacy consideration. It's issue number 5682. So initially we discussed this item in October last year, and this issue has been back and forth on the EIPIP meeting. This time it was added by Sam Wilson to today's agenda, and I suppose it is about getting affirmation to the decision made in the earlier meeting and proposing the changes with a PR. So Sam, if you would like to maybe briefly go over the issue and reiterate the decision, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, so some people really want privacy explicitly mentioned for some reason. I don't really understand why. And I think I'm the only one blocking that. So I think a reasonable compromise would be to rename the security consideration section to just security and privacy. And that was proposed by Greg on Discord.
Are you planning to open a pull request with this change?
I was going to, but it looks like Matt doesn't want to allow a security and privacy section.
I think
So
this is valid.
Just to be clear, this would just be renaming the security considerations to security and privacy. And you don't have to talk about privacy if you don't want to. It would just be a name change.
So I'm assuming Matt is still not in favor of this renaming. Yeah, it would be gathered, consensus from other editors. I know, yeah, is in favor for a very long time. Sam coming to a neutral point with a little bit of change to the security consideration. Matt, not in favor. Greg, if you would like to add anything, and Gajendra Singh, if you have any thoughts you would like to add to this one.
I'm not sure what the objections are, unless we just don't want to talk about privacy.
Is there a single example of a core EIP where this would have been relevant? I can see for ERCs it makes sense. I guess I'm just curious on like the core.
In interface, in interface and network, it could also be useful. So maybe only core doesn't need it, and then we can exclude core for sure. But I do see value in all other layers.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that just creates a bunch of like random work. I'm not an editor, but like I'm fine with just a name change. I just wanted to make sure there's no.
So one of the example I can think of is the one that is in discussion, which is the Ethereum provider in browser. So they're trying to allow multiple Ethereum providers, and then by allowing Ethereum provider, the involvement would be: do you notify user if they should connect it, and if so, does it reveal your address? And then that is by itself not an ERC problem. And also, you could get your transaction bundled in some bundlers, and then not go through, and then does that different implication of your intention, and does that involve any possible MEV, future MEV activity? So these are things that can get weird. And core, of course, everything needs to be changed, but even so, I think there might be other considerations in the future. So I'm okay that core doesn't include it. I do see, I get convinced. I start off without knowing this could be a possible thing, but I think I get convinced that in other layers there's very, very often ignorance of privacy. And some authors do want to let reader know that, hey, you should actually consider this.
My concern was just that, yes, often privacy considerations are important, but they are often so intertwined with security issues that trying to do them as a separate section can be difficult. And so it just makes more sense to handle them together. If they're fairly separate in a proposal, well, you do them in separate paragraphs. But forcing them into two sections when they're relevant can just make it too difficult. And in the discussion, someone linked to the IETF advice on that, and specific examples there where really the privacy was a concern, and it was a security concern for the user if privacy was not maintained. So they just seem closely related enough to put them in the same section. And I don't see a big objection there. So.
I see a comment by Sam in the chat, like if core and ERC have different rules for adding, I think we should hold off until we split the repos. We do have this discussion as our next agenda item. So if it is fine, we can probably give it a rest and give some time to have the discussion about splitting ERCs and core EIPs, and probably we'll get, yep.
Can I quickly comment on that? I think there's a part that didn't get talked about, which is the core versus all other EIPs, not just ERC. And the example I gave is about interface, and then I do think that there's a privacy issue with network as well. So if we are talking about carving out core EIP versus all other EIPs, I think that is a good discussion that we can hold off to. But if we're only talking about carving out ERC versus core and network and interface, then I don't think there's a good boundary to draw in deciding whether they should include privacy section or not.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. But in case we get the core EIPs out of this, like rest of the EIPs, not only just with ERC, also from interface and networking, I'm not sure what is the proposal here. But if we do, then probably getting to a consensus about this particular one will be way easier than it is right now. All right, so let's try to give it a rest right over here. We have about 20 minutes left on the call. So let's get into the next item, which is kind of one of the biggest can of worms coming our way. So the next item that we are going to discuss is about splitting ERCs and core EIPs. Most of the people on this call are very much familiar with the discussion point. We have been discussing in this meeting as well. I'm curious to hear what has changed since last, and what do we want to discuss for today's meeting? So proposers, please take it away.
Sure, maybe I can start. Yeah, so I guess what changed since the last time, so we now have people who are like reviewing ERCs and like, like thinking about them as like a first class thing as part of EIP editors. And I think that was always like, for me, the biggest blocker, where if like, I didn't want to like end up in a world where we just like break out the ERCs and like there's like no one reviewing them. And Matt and Sam have like agreed that they could stay on as editors on both sides if we were to split things. So yeah, I think having that like means we have probably like the capacity to handle both repos. In terms of why we should split them, like I think high level it's just there's like very different users for each type of like EIPs, whether that's like ERCs or like protocol changes. And talking with client teams, it's like increasingly like every time we talk with them, basically they say they'd rather have it split and they'd like to see the EIPs process sort of evolve in a direction that's like more closely coupled to like protocol development. And similarly, there's a bunch of things I can imagine from the ERC sides where it would make sense for that to evolve to a world like towards something that's more coupled with like application layer development. Yeah, so I don't think there's like any like huge new reason for like why we want to do this. I think it's something that like, at least on the core side, like pretty much all the users or like folks I interact with who like write EIPs would rather have this changed. And if we have the resources to do it, I think it makes sense to. Yeah, I'll pause here, but it's the background.
Tim, what's the intention? At which level do we carve it out? Is it just core EIP and leave the network and interface in the repository area, or network and interface?
I think networking probably I think core network and networking makes sense together for sure. Interface is a bit of a weird one. I don't have a strong opinion. I could see it go either way. And maybe it gets duplicated like across both categories. Yeah, honestly, like maybe interface, meta, and informational sort of get duplicated or sent to one side or the other. I don't have a strong view on that. I think core and networking makes sense together. Meta probably makes sense more on the core side, just because of how it's been used historically. Informational and interface seem like maybe they could just be duplicated. And then, yeah, so the question, okay, of numbering, my very simple proposal for numbering is like you use odd numbers on one side, even numbers on the other side. So like we're moving to the bot, and you just have the bot, you know, modulo 1, modulo 0, depending on which repo you're in. So like you sort of start from the same number, and that means you're gonna have to hard code it, you know, on one side. But like say you started from number 8,000 or whatever, then you just like increment using even or odd. And
So they're gonna be
yeah,
like Siamese twins.
sorry?
They're gonna be like Siamese twins.
Yes, basically.
Separate
Which over time,
individuals joined at the hip for life.
well, hopefully over time they can like each walk their own way, and like
Then
yeah.
they start their numbering system separately, and people go, oh, these two numbering systems are independent. Otherwise, it's just sort of, I don't know. This whole discussion has struck me as so stupid from the very start.
Well, sure, but like literally every client dev I speak with would rather see this. So, and like I get that you object to it, but it seems like, yeah, it just seems like, yeah.
What is it they really want? Splitting the
I think
repos is just, it's just an administrative system that we use to file things and give them numbers and run some bots. The conceptual distinction is what matters. And that's.
But we don't want to set the same process down for both. Like it would be nice if we could have some of the process be different for ERCs. And right now it's not easy to do that.
It is already different, right? It is already different that to finalize, you need to actually be going through the hard work.
That's not a requirement.
I think
Yeah.
it is, right? It's in the EIP1.
I don't think it's in EIP1.
So the present difference between core and any other proposal is like core generally is when it is with a network upgrade, we keep on waiting. The last period, I mean, like when it reaches to last call, that also happens when it goes on testnet, not before that. So there are certain criteria which kind of keep it separate from rest of the proposal. So it is different. I think it would be interesting to understand what is that is blocking, because
it doesn't, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't block, it just adds a bunch of random friction. And you could imagine, it's like we're always like contrasting what's like the state today, but you could imagine a world that's like we actually have like a really well coupled process where, say, to go to last call, there's something like this is actually implemented or has like a series of tests, in like execution tests, and we can just get like more specific around like what are the technical requirements for like core EIPs. I think over time, as well as we incorporate more of like the CL stuff into it, it just like reduces having to coordinate between CL and EL is already kind of hard. Having to coordinate between like ERCs and EIPs is already kind of hard. So like, just reducing that to like CL and EL gives you, just like less people to coordinate with. And it doesn't mean, again, like, some of the actual people might stay on both sides. And like, I think, I think, it just opens the door as well to like folks in the application layer, like to feel like this is their space, and like that process can evolve more towards like an application standardization process, which is different. EIPs are like they're like something stronger in a way than a standard, where like you're not forced to use the ERC20 standard, right? Like you can deploy a contract and create a token that doesn't use it, but like you do have to implement the EIP 1559 if you want to run Ethereum. And there is like a subtle but like important difference there. And I think just like they're literally different things that we're trying to do, and they sort of started out bundled together, but it just makes sense to like have them logically separated a bit more.
The IETF manages a huge range of documents, some of which are informational, some of which directly affect the internet protocol, others of which define applications that people may or may not run, and they run a single editorial staff. They have a single numbering system. And I've said we've got issues we need to solve that we keep going, oh, we'll split the repo, but that doesn't actually solve the issues. It creates issues of its own. And it comes down to things like, well, EIP1 will get a bit more complicated. Well, so EIP1 has 2 chapters, or we decide that we're going to have a different EIP for these things. It's just, it introduces complications, and I don't see that it wins us a whole lot. And with the odd even numbering thing, I keep coming back to that because it simply means we haven't actually separated the processes. We have to like coordinate the numbering forever. And repos.
I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. Like, we started with them together, and
Yes.
I
We
don't
don't
like
split the repos. Then we don't have this problem.
I mean, we just made a mistake in the beginning putting them together. They're like totally separate types of things that we're trying to coordinate around. One is core EIPs that everyone has to implement, they have to agree on, otherwise they're left behind. Then you have the ERCs, which is like way more similar to internet standards, where it's like, this is the state of the art, this is how it's specified, you should probably use it, but you don't have to, you can do whatever you want. And I just think like it doesn't make sense to tie these two things together.
So the IETF should actually have 2 separate editorial things. And
There's nothing in the IETF that everybody has to implement. People can do whatever they want. There is no concept of consensus.
RFC 1034 is a DNS standard. So if you don't use that, you don't get DNS.
I mean, sure, same thing with HTTP. If you don't implement HTTP, you don't get HTTP. But it's like, you don't have to use HTTP. You don't have to use DNS. You can come up with your own protocol for finding the IP addresses of names. ENS, like, we have other ways of doing these things. If you want to implement the core...
With that logic, if you don't want to use Ethereum, you don't have to use Ethereum. But then again,
exactly, and you can go add BIPs to Bitcoin's repository.
And that's where I'm going with this. It's like the IETF is so general that it can standardize multiple competing protocols like POP3 and IMAP, let's say. Whereas we are specifically an Ethereum document repository, and there are certain documents that if you don't implement, you can't be on Ethereum. So there's a slight difference between us and the IETF.
But for ERCs, I think it's a way more similar analogy. Like, you don't have to implement ERC20s in your protocol. You can use a different token standard.
Right, there can be competing parallel implementations of ERCs. There cannot be for EIPs. Like, at least like that are final, right? Like there can be 2, there's been like 3 withdrawal EIPs, but at the end of the day, it's like 4895 is the spec, right? And all the other ones are just like dead end drafts. And that's like a fundamental difference.
But that's the idea with the standardization here. Like what I have observed so far, when ERC are being edited, ERC are being reviewed, we generally try to make sure that there is no existing standard which already has the same kind of specification, unless there is some improvement or unless that specifies that it is based on top of an earlier existing ERC standard, then only it is allowed. So one more thing I would like
use. Sorry, you can still use ERC20s even though ERC 1155s exist. You can argue that like 1155s are better, but like it doesn't block people from using ERC20s. Whereas today, like on Ethereum, like on mainnet, when we changed the gas costs, you can argue that the old gas costs were better, but you can't use the old gas costs. And that's the difference, right? You like force everyone on that change.
I actually think that having ERC and EIP and core EIP, I have to clear, and I do feel very confusing when people say EIP only to referring to core EIP in some cases. So I like to use core EIP versus all other EIP. And I see strong value in keeping them in the same repository and then keeping people so that people can have an eye on both sides. I don't think it's a bug to begin with. It's actually a good thing. One example is that Vitalik himself tried 3 times to go for account abstraction, and 2 of them were using were trying to resolve it in a course aspect, and then it didn't went very far. And then so account abstraction, the 4337 is attempting on a different layer. So that kind of knowledge does not get propagated very far if you have people working in silo. And that's why I think having four EIP versus other EIP would be a good idea in the same place. But we can definitely, if the problem is about people don't like putting in EIP and they go to a random repo, I'm fully with you. I think we put too much burden in too much restriction in author, and I'm always a big fan of relaxing it and author, right? Like we don't allow other consideration. We don't allow people put for private. We just make up this reason that I don't feel very strong, and then over any author who want to do this, which seems to be in the way of what, and then it would not be changed even if a core EIP is carved out. I bet that is going to be the case as well. I don't see very convincing argument right now how carve it out can actually let people come over with the current set of rule. Yeah, so unless that is resolved, I don't see this is a. I really want to see people coming and use this as their way, as a place to draft their EIP by making it more flexible.
I mean, the idea is that we're going to be able to then evolve these processes and slightly separately. Like you have all of these things that you feel are important to do for the process, and I have to argue against it because I don't feel it's very important in the core process, or it doesn't align with the core process. And we're spending tons of time debating all these things, and I think they would be useful if they were just for ERCs. And I want to unlock this so that you and other people involved with ERCs can experiment with it.
I mean non-core, right? Are you referring non-core,
Yeah.
or do you refer to interface and network?
I mean, there's so few networking. I mean, I think we should deprecate networking. There's not very many interface. I'm specifically talking with ERCs. This is the biggest EIP category by far.
What do you think about the interface?
I mean, I think generally we should also deprecate interface because we have execution APIs, which covers the majority of the interface, the types of things that interface standardize. The one place where it's a little bit confusing is around like JavaScript libraries, and they're wanting to have standards. And I think that, you know, maybe it's painful, but they should probably migrate to interface on ERCs and just like call them ERCs. I don't really care that much though. Like there's so few of them, they could stay EAPs too. Like it doesn't really matter to me.
Up until now, I feel that ERC is not about anything to be standardized on a small contract. So I feel it very confusing to put when you say that they should migrate the JavaScript library onto ERCs. And
no, I'm saying that they should refer to their standards as ERC interface standard, ERC Web3 provider standard. Right now they have
referring it
defined
to interface EIP right now, right?
Yeah, I'm saying that we should get rid of interface EIPs also and call them like ERCs and move them to the ERC repository. Like things that are related to the application layer, I think that should live and be ERCs, and things more related to the core layer, I think should be like EIPs.
Yeah, if we divide it by audience, right? So the people who are implementing it, and generally speaking, like networking and core will be implemented together. So they should be in a repository together, and like interface and ERC will likely be implemented together, so they should live together.
I guess, yeah, just because to be mindful of time, like my suggestion would be like I can bring this up on the next All Core Devs and see what clients think. But I think if the client teams strongly desire this, like given the core EIP process is effectively there as a way to like standardize what is mostly their work, I would like to move forward with this. But I'm happy to check in on All Core Devs and like see if there's like broad support for this by client teams.
Can we have a list of items that they think it's really bad and hard to you to do in an EIP, in the current EIP repository? And then I felt like a lot of things exist in our policy restriction. Like I was involved in the complaints that people cannot even link to execution spec, and that's one of the reasons they just stopped proposing that. I thought one of the EIP just caught it in the draft status because of one of the one case in that. So I love to see what's the real reason that they don't like to come to EIP, and we should fix that. I really feel we should fix our EIP and just relax our restrictions. We can't link to yellow paper. We can't link to a lot of things.
I don't want to ask them to come up with a laundry list of things they don't like about the EIP process. Like we've asked them this in the past. They absolutely hate the EIP process, more or less. Like this is not going to go over well.
Wait, but a lot of times is I have to respectfully disagree with you that a lot of policy is towards that direction, and I just trying to avoid those policy and keep making those policy.
I'm just telling you, I talk to core devs every single day, and they do not like the EIP process. We've turned into a joke to them.
I'll like slightly nuance this. Like I do think people have appreciated like the small, like there's been like a bunch of small changes at the margin in like the past year or two. Like I think it and like having new editors actually work on stuff has been helpful. So I don't want to like completely dismiss the changes, but I think it's I would agree though. It's like almost asking them about like what they don't like. It like people feel very checked out from the EIP process in a way, where like they just feel like it's like this thing that they don't really have control over, or like every time they engage with it, it's like not the best experience, and like splitting the process basically gives them like ownership over the thing, where it's like yeah, this can now be the process that's focused with like core development, and like we can just not have any other considerations beyond that as we're doing changes to it. I do need to hop as well though, unfortunately. But is it helpful to put this on the Awkward Devs agenda for next week, or do people feel like there's not any value there?
I would also love to hear more thoughts about like what specific changes like client teams are looking to have in the new process that is going to make it different from the present process. And that's why it would be useful for them to have a new process altogether.
Okay, I'll add that at the end of Awkward Devs tomorrow. Actually next week, if we have time, we'll get into it. Like if it's possible, we run over and don't have time to get into that. But I think, yeah, we can try.
I think we should know, like, if the core teams say that they want to get rid of the ERCs from the core repository, are we going to do it, or are we just going to come back to this call and block it?
Like I said in chat, we don't need consensus on this.
We do kind of need consensus though. Like
we do not.
I mean, of course, we can fork the repository and do whatever we want, but that's just like we want to have a subdomain on ethereum.org that says ERCs and EIPs, and somebody has to decide who, you know, picks the repository that it points to, and those people are kind of us right now.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm happy to sit in. I'm happy to sit in a core group and ask what kind of thing, and then we can make that list and see if it's doable, and maybe they'll come up with the ideal state that it's achievable, and then either it's by forking, that's fine, either it's not.
The core devs are not going to babysit the EIP process. They don't want to sit and engage. They have so many breakout rooms and other things to do. They're not going to try and talk about the process. That's their least favorite thing to do. They don't even want to go to the calls where they talk about the technical things. They're not going to engage with us.
And then they will have a repository they lose control of, and then they will feel bad, and then they will go to random places.
They don't have control of this repository. I'm trying to provide some sort of viewpoint to you guys about how they feel about the repository. And they don't want to deal with ERCs.
I have never blocked a updates in a. They don't have to. They don't even have to look at or write in. But I don't see. A lot of us have not blocked any of their edits.
This
So-
is why whenever we added you originally as an ERC editor, that I didn't want to like add you as a full editor, because then we would have to debate like the merits of doing things at core and comparing them with ERCs. And again, here, like we're just debating about, you're saying that it's okay for core developers, and I'm saying as a core developer and as someone who's working with them on a day-to-day basis that it's not okay. And now we're in the stalemate, and you're going to block the ability to like remove ERCs.
I'll block it too. It doesn't solve the problem. It's just, it's a bookkeeping system. It's a filing cabinet. And we're arguing about, well, if we put things in different filing cabinets, it'll solve a problem. It won't solve the problem.
When is the last time that you utilized the GitHub notifications to interact with the EIPIP repository?
I use a different way, and then on the other hand, I'm here to provide aspect of the authors. I feel it's not very well represented, even though the majority of the vast a portion of it is from EIP. And then I do feel that when you use that comment, I feel a little bit personal. I don't want to go down that route, but I do believe that there's a lot of value in having people look at both sides of the category as well. And then my argument is that splitting it doesn't solve the problem, just like you. And you are still going to block and make it very hard in the future for all the new core EIP repository for them to edit, and then they will be unhappy. So that's will be my argument. Whether that you believe it or not, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think we are over time. We will be probably listening to more directly from the core devs in the next all core dev meeting. It would be really interesting to hear their thoughts, like what they are trying to introduce as a core EIP process that is going to help them. If that is something really good, I would hope that ERC or any other category process should also implement those changes. It would be nice to have changes which are going to make life simple of new authors. If that's okay, we can probably wrap it at this point, and we'll look forward to the decision or suggestions coming up from the all core dev meeting. So I know we had a couple of more items. Those are real quick. One is EIPS Insight. I have already added the list of proposals here. We received one EIP in final status, and that is, of course, ERC category. We did receive 8 drafts. Out of those 8, 1 is core, and the rest 7 are ERC drafts. We have only one proposal in last call with deadline 15th August. The proposal is 6093. For rest of the details, people may refer to the HackMD or the EIPSinsight.com. We did have a EIP editing office hour yesterday. Recording from the past meeting is added, and also the agenda where authors can add their pull request to be discussed in the next meeting if it is not merged before the next one. I have also added the summary from the last meeting, also shared by Sam Wilson on the ETH R&D Discord. Please check it out. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope to see some good reference point from the next all core dev meeting to have it discussed in this meeting. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Bye.